Good morning. If you will, open up to Luke chapter 19. That's where we're going to be taking a look at a familiar story, the story of Zacchaeus. But the reason that we're looking at it is because of what Christ says in response to Zacchaeus. And what he will say is one of the clearest statements that he makes as to why he came to earth. And so we've been looking this year occasionally at these times where Christ clarifies his reason for being here, his reason for coming into a fleshly body for a period of time. And so we're going to see that here as Christ says that he came to seek and to save that which was lost. And so we'll look at that statement, but we'll give, of course, a little bit of the background and the story first. So we start then really in chapter 18 of Luke. And in chapter 18, we see Christ on his way to the city of Jericho. In verse 31 of Luke 18, it says, "Then he took the 12 aside and said to them, Behold, we are going up to Jerusalem, and all things that are written by the prophets concerning the Son of Man will be accomplished. For he will be delivered to the Gentiles, and will be mocked, and insulted, and spit upon, and they will scourge him, and kill him, and the third day he will rise again." Christ has just made a clear statement, not about why he came to earth on the whole, but what will happen to him quite shortly. And so this starts to set up our context, because Christ is not just headed to Jericho at some random time in his ministry. Christ is at the end of his earthly ministry. He's actually headed to Jerusalem, and Jericho is just a stop on the way there. And when he gets to Jerusalem, this is what's going to happen. He will be killed. He will be delivered over to the Gentiles. He will be mistreated in every way. And that will happen within about a week. So that's where we find ourselves. After he tells that, he heals a blind man at the end of chapter 18, and then enters the city of Jericho in chapter 19 and verse 1. And so we find him here at this city. We know the history of this city because of the events that take place in the book of Joshua. But one thing that might be an interesting connection there is that the story of the fall of Jericho is partially about the walls falling, but we also remember the one person or family that was spared, which would be one of the great ancestors of Christ himself in Rahab. And so he's coming back to the place where at least one of his ancestors is from. But then we're introduced to, in verse 2, a man by the name of Zacchaeus, and we're told that he was a chief tax collector and he was rich. And so he has the unfortunate combination of being a tax collector and being rich, and therefore being hated. Now, when it says he's a tax collector, it specifies a chief tax collector, which it's kind of hard to establish exactly what that is, but it seems that he was over a group of other tax collectors. And so he's not just an IRS agent, he's a higher up in the IRS, and he's rich. And so you kind of do that mental math and say, oh, he's rich and he collects taxes. Obviously, he is a dishonest man. Well, he, for his part, will defend himself in a minute, and we'll see that. But he was both of these things at least. He was a tax collector and he was rich. But beyond that, he sought, in verse 3, he sought to see Jesus, or see who Jesus was. And so it doesn't specify why he wants to figure out more about Christ. It could be, if you want to be cynical about it, that he has some ulterior motive, that he thinks Christ could enrich him farther maybe. But it doesn't say that, and so it's just as likely that he is genuinely interested in who this teacher might be, because everybody's talking about him, because he's healed a lot of people, and he's made a name for himself. So there could be any number of reasons there. Christ is going to invite him, as you'll remember in the story, or Christ is going to invite himself, rather, to Zacchaeus' house. And in verse 6, it says that he made haste and came down and received him joyfully. But when they saw it, when it says they, that is, any of the crowds that are around him, probably including some religious leaders, as would be normal, but when they saw it, they complained, saying, "He has gone to be a guest with a man who is a sinner." Now, being a tax collector was enough to make you labeled a sinner at that time. And so they're going to lodge this complaint against Christ. not really against Zacchaeus, although they call him out as a sinner, but the complaint is this man is willing to eat with and therefore approve in some way this person who is a sinner. So that's when Zacchaeus defends himself. In verse 8, he says, I give half of my goods to the poor, and if I've taken anything from anyone by false accusation, I restore fourfold. And so he says of himself at least that he is honest. Not only is he honest, but when he's found himself to be dishonest, he's returned back fourfold whatever was taken. Okay? Well, Christ does not reprimand him for this statement. Christ does not say, well, none of that's true. In fact, quite the opposite. It seems Zacchaeus is telling the truth about himself here. It seems that Zacchaeus is a pretty honorable man. But that's just the part of the story that Zacchaeus is involved in. What we want to see then are these couple verses after this. So this is where Christ will speak and say the words that give his purpose for being here. So verses 9 and 10. And Jesus said to him, Today salvation has come to this house, because he is also a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost. We're going to break this text down kind of phrase by phrase here in order to make sure that we understand everything that Christ means by this. And so we'll start, of course, with today salvation has come to this house. There's kind of two ways that Christ could mean that. He could be saying that because of the faith of Zacchaeus, that salvation, that is the salvation of Zacchaeus, has come to his house. And so he's been so faithful, he's been so good, so just, that he deserves salvation that's come to him. That's possible. Not that Zacchaeus is deserving of salvation just because he's a just man, but he has shown some faith seeking out Christ as well. So that's one possibility. The other one is just as likely, or maybe it's a combination of both, is that Christ says, salvation has come to your house. How do I know? Because I'm here. Because I am salvation. And so I have physically entered your house, and with me comes salvation, or the message of salvation, however you want to take that. But salvation is with Zacchaeus at this time. But he gives a reason for this as well. He says that salvation has come because he also is a son of Abraham. Now, if we take that statement at face value, then that would contradict most of the New Testament. Because what it almost sounds like is Christ is saying, salvation's come to you because you're a Jew. Is that how that works? That's kind of the opposite of what we're taught everywhere else. And so, what makes him a son of Abraham? And it seems that Christ already in his earthly ministry is hinting at what Paul will say more plainly later on in different texts, but specifically one like Galatians 3 and verse 7, where he says, Therefore, know that only those who are of faith are sons of Abraham. And so we see Zacchaeus as a son of Abraham, sure, but really one that is faithful to God. That's what makes him a son of Abraham, not just his bloodline. But even with this, what Christ is doing, at least in part in these two verses, he's responding to the complaint that was made. He's responding to the accusation that was made. And the accusation was that you're willing to eat with this person who's a sinner. And so he's kind of doubled down on this already to say, okay, you say I'm eating with a sinner, but I tell you that this man, who you're calling a sinner, he is saved. Salvation has come to his house, and he is a true son of Abraham. That probably isn't going to sit too well with those who were making that original complaint. And so what he's going to say next explains how it's even possible that a man that's so sinful in their eyes could be saved. And so he says in verse 10, Therefore, the Son of Man has come to seek and save that which was lost. He didn't come to seek and save that which was just. He didn't come to seek and save that which was righteous. He didn't come to seek and save those who were religious experts of their day. He came to seek and to save the lost. And so in a way, he's sort of agreeing with them. He's saying, you say that he's a sinner and I've come to his house. Okay, fair enough. Who else am I supposed to go to? It's a lot like what we looked at before in Christ's statements of why he came, his mission, his purpose for being here, and saying that the doctor doesn't need to see those who are well, but instead those who are sick are in need. And that's what we see here. Zacchaeus is in need, and he recognizes it. Seems to be why he seeks out Christ in the first place. So the Son of Man has come to seek and save that which is lost. So the Son of Man, as Christ often refers to himself, has come for this purpose. So where has he come to? Again, you can kind of take this not in two different ways, but just on two different scales. Christ has come to the household of Zacchaeus to seek and save that which was lost. True enough, he's come to this individual's house. He is lost. Anyone who comes in contact with Christ at this point is lost to start with, but when Christ comes to them, salvation can come to them as well. So on that scale, that's true. But you expand that and you say Christ has come where? Into the world to seek and save that which was lost. And that's just as true. There are two words used here, two important words, two verbs, seek and save. So you look at the word seek, and there's not necessarily anything special about that word, whether in English or in Greek. It means to seek, it means to look for, like you would expect. But there is an implication of Christ seeking that maybe we don't always think about. So if you, right now, let's say you're hungry, that's probably accurate, and if you're going to seek food out, is it going to work for you to sit right where you are? Are you going to ever find food just sitting there? You might find a few snacks here and there, but you're not going to find a meal just sitting there, okay? That means you have to get up, it means you have to leave, and you have to go somewhere that you might be able to find that. Well, in terms of Christ, he's telling us why he came into the world, but what is he also saying? He's saying to seek and to save the lost, that means I had to get up, it means I had to leave where I was, it means I had to go away from everything that was comfortable to me to seek out those who were lost. So Christ not only comes to earth for this reason, Christ leaves heaven for this reason. To seek, to go and look for those who are lost. Not just to seek them out though, but also to save. And so, again, the word is not so different in English as it is in Greek, but it does have a little bit more meaning to it, a little bit more implication, which is that to save, by extension, the word that's used here, to save means to save someone or something that is in danger, something that is already in peril of some kind, to rescue something from destruction. And so that just gives a little bit more depth to say that Christ came not just to save in some general religious sense, but Christ came to save those who were destined to be destroyed. Again, that fits us pretty well. And so Christ came to seek and to save that which was lost. That which was already destined to be lost, to be destroyed, to be separated. And so again, you can look at the scale here, and you can say that Christ came to seek and save the lost of this one household, of Zacchaeus. You expand that out farther, and you can say that Christ came to seek and save the lost of the Jewish nation, or among the Gentiles as well, the whole of the world. Christ came into the world to seek and to save the lost. So that's Christ's purpose for coming here, or at least one of the reasons that he gives. So how do we take that? I guess the first question is this: is Christ's mission here our mission? I think the answer pretty much is yes, with a little bit of clarification. Is it our mission to seek out the lost? It is. Not only that, but part of that mission would necessitate our acting the same way that Christ did. It would require me to say, you know what, if I'm going to seek out the lost, and Christ was willing to leave heaven to do that, then maybe, just maybe, I have to be willing to leave what I'm comfortable with in order to seek out those who are lost. It means that I might have to go a little farther out of my way than I think I would like to. It might mean that my comfort zone needs to expand to reach those who are lost, but also to save. Now, to say that we're to go and to save, that's where we need a little clarification, but it's not hard for us to understand. It is given to us the task of saving. Not because I can save, but because I've been given something that's able to save. And I think this principle actually is illustrated quite well following this text. Because immediately after this, in verse 11, it says, "Now as they heard these things," the words we just heard, he spoke another parable. And what parable is that? Well, as Luke records it, it's the parable of the minas. As Matthew records it, it's the parable of the talents. But the same parable either way, to say the same thing. That you've been given something precious, what are you going to do with it? Are you going to double your master's income, as it were? Are you going to take that resource and spread that around and produce more? Well, that's what we're talking about here. Our mission is to seek and to save the lost. Christ has given us the message to save. It saved us. What are we going to do with it? The seeking that we do, it may be that seeking takes us far, far away from where we start, but it also may not. And so there's a place, certainly, for missions and for mission work. But this text is a little bit different, because where Christ has gone is really not that far away. In fact, Christ himself will never leave a 100-mile radius from where he's born, really. But he goes down the street to the house of a tax collector, and he sees that he's in need, that he's lost. And so it may be that we cross an ocean to seek out the lost, and it may be that they're down the street from us. And it doesn't really matter too much either way, so long as we are seeking, and so long as we are able to spread that message to those who need to be saved. That being said, when we start to carry out that mission, we can kind of expect the same response that Christ gets here. The response being a complaint against him to say, hey, he eats with sinners. Well, sometimes people will say that. A lot of times people won't understand the reason that we do something, but we aren't seeking and saving everyone, because not everyone will respond this way. But we don't have to necessarily save everyone or even seek everyone. But there are people out there that aren't those who are going to complain, because there are also people still, just like Zacchaeus, who are already looking for Christ, who are already seeking him out. And when you find one of those people that already has that interest, they're going to be the ones that you're able to save, because they are already seeking out the one who was seeking them. So with that, and with all of this text, there's kind of a scary idea, at least in my mind, that to a certain extent, the mission of Christ, his purpose for coming to earth, that the success of that mission depends on me, and it depends on you. Not because Christ is not powerful enough or not capable of saving, but because there are so many that will reject him, and because there are some seeking him out that aren't being reached. And that's really where that concern comes in for me is, well, if I'm not going to Zacchaeus, then salvation's not going to come to his house. And even if he were seeking out Christ, if I'm not going and seeking him out as Christ sought me out, then it's not going to work out for Zacchaeus. And so how many people do I leave unreached because of that? Zacchaeus personally had obstacles potentially between him and Christ. He was rich. Christ tells us that is an obstacle to entering the kingdom of heaven, certainly. He was a tax collector, which means in the eyes of the people he was a sinner. That's certainly an issue. And so maybe his career could have come first. Maybe his wealth could have come first. Maybe he desired things other than Christ. Maybe he could have sought out things other than Christ. But instead, he chooses to seek Christ. And simply choosing to seek Christ can overcome all kinds of obstacles, whatever they may be. One important reminder as we look at this whole lesson is that Christ didn't come to Zacchaeus' house because he deserved salvation. And Christ doesn't come to me because I deserve salvation. Even if I am just, even if I deal fairly with people, even if I give fourfold back, if I wrong somebody, that doesn't make me deserving of Christ and his salvation. But that's kind of the whole point that Jesus is making to this crowd. They say, hey, you're eating with a sinner. And he says, yep, that's because he needs to be saved. And so you look at your situation and you say, well, Christ was willing to associate with me. And then I have to look at myself and say, yeah, he was willing to associate with me, sure. but not because I was worth it, but because he chose to do it anyway. But that's the one last thing that I want to say this morning, and what I want us to dwell on for just a second, to meditate on for just a second. Jesus Christ's mission as a whole was to come and to seek and save that which was lost. It's a great phrase. It's wonderful to think about. But just for a second, personalize that phrase, because it's true that Jesus Christ came into this world to seek and to save you. He left heaven. He lived here. He died on the cross as he described and predicted back in that last chapter for you. He came to look for you. The only question that we have in response is, what are we going to do? Are we going to seek him out or not? If you already have, wonderful. But somewhere out there is a Zacchaeus in your life that's seeking out Christ too, that maybe you have access to that other people don't, that you can reach with the message of salvation, just as Christ came and was able to save you because he was looking for you. This morning you have an opportunity either to be saved, to have salvation come to your household today, or to share this message so that it can come to someone else's. Either way, or if you have any other need, we ask that you come forward now as we stand, as we sing.